Now I continue with Cahit Tanyol. Okay, not like. Now, Ibrahim Yasa was from Western Turkey, whereas Cahit Tanyol is from Southeastern Turkey. He is born into a village, like Ibrahim Yasa, into a village in Gaziantep. Okay, Gaziantep, Nizip district. Now his grandfather studied medicine in Halep and learned, for example, so he's born in 1914, whereas Ibrahim Yasa was born in 1911, so close to each other, 1910s, still Ottomans. Yeah, they are both born into Ottoman period of Turkey. Okay, and his grandfather studied medicine in Halep. Gaziantep and Halep, they are very close to each other. Cities, they are close cities. There are no national boundaries at that time. And for example, he was familiar with Ibn Sina's books. Anyway, Cahit Tanyol had his primary education in Nizip, in the town that his village was attached. And like Ibrahim Yasa going to a nearby larger city teachers college, Cahit Tanyol enrolled into Adana Teachers College. Adana Teachers College. So it seems in Gaziantep there was not yet this teachers college there, but his father emphasized. No, not his father. Mother. Mother is very important. Mother emphasized that he do this exam. Why mother? Because Cahit Tanyol's father died during War of Liberation, First World War and War of Liberation. So his mother took her children and went back to his father's house. So the grandfather, who studied some medicine, traditional medicine, modern medicine, anyway, he was an educated man. He mentored Cahit Tanyol, and obviously his mother was also a clever woman, so insisted that her son go to teachers college. And actually he didn't stop there. He went to Ankara Gazi Eğitim Enstitüsü, Gazi Training Institute for Teachers. That is, from Adana Teachers College, you become a primary school teacher. But from Ankara Gazi Institute for Teachers, you become a teacher for high schools. So he graduated from there, and he became a teacher in various cities. For a sociologist, what a marvelous thing. He went to Yozgat, to Çorum, to Western Anatolia, to Izmir. But obviously he was ambitious, and so he wanted a university education. So Gazi Training Institute education was not enough for him. So he went to Istanbul University and enrolled in philosophy department. As philosophy department, almost all intellectuals at that time enroll into Istanbul University philosophy department. In 1940s, Hilmi Ziya Ülken is already there, if you remember. So Cahit Tanyol is in the same department, studying. From philosophy, he becomes an assistant in sociology. Okay, Hilmi Ziya Ülken's assistant in this sense, and starts his PhD studies. Okay, so the difference here between Cahit Tanyol and İbrahim Yasa, İbrahim Yasa entered into when he was in Istanbul University into an exam of Minister of Education to be sent to send abroad for university education and postgraduate graduate education, whereas it seems Cahit Tanyol didn't have that opportunity, but he had the opportunity to enter into assistant exam of sociology department and become an assistant in sociology department and started studying for his PhD. And he obtained his PhD in 1949. He became an associate professor there in the beginning of 1950s, and he became a professor there. So he became the chair. Anyway, in 1960, as you remember, Hilmi Ziya Ülken was taken from his job. 147 people from the universities were either moved away from university to another university, or their relationship with university, they were sacked. They were was severed. Their relationship with university was severed. Anyway, in the case of Hilmi Ziya Ülken, he was sent to Ankara University theology faculty, if you remember. So Cahit Tanyol became the chairperson and became the professor. Now let me talk about Tanyol's research. Now, again, in contrast to Yasa, Cahit Tanyol is more in terms of political sociology, although he also has village studies. He starts actually with the village study, and then he moves into historical sociology. And the same way that, for example, Bahattin in our department teaches comparative historical sociology. He is our historical sociologist. Anyway, Cahit Tanyol is also in historical sociology. But as I said, he started his initial research with village studies. I actually reproduced a summary of his villages in Gaziantep, Peşke, Binamlı village, and actually other mountain and waterless. This is an example of a mountain village, a waterless village, and through these mountain villages between Gaziantep and Nizip, he had 3 village monographies. Now, village monographical study. Now, the monographical study is tradition that is advocated by Prince Bahattin, and also Ziya Gökalp. As you remember, Ziya Gökalp also has some studies on Kurdish tribes in Diyarbakır, in his native town. Although he is himself, as he demonstrates and he writes about that. He is not himself from a Kurdish origin in Diyarbakır. He says he's from a Turkish population in Diyarbakır. But since there are both Turkish and Kurdish populations there, families there, he studied Kurdish tribes. Now, Cahit Tanyol studied Turkish tribes in Gaziantep. Now, these mountain villages, they called Turkmen villages. He studied them, and he tried to understand how these villages, he's doing these studies again 1950s, and it is published, for example, this study is published in 1956, 1950s. It is not being transformed yet, whereas İbrahim Yasa''s village, Hasanoğlan village, was already being transformed, being close to a railroad and a rail transportation. Now, these villages that Cahit Tanyol studied were not being transformed. So he studied, his focus is mores and traditions, pre-modern Turkmen villagers. Some of them transhuman, migrating to the mountains, coming back, etc. You know, that kind. But how eventually they are integrated first into Nizip town and then eventually to Gaziantep, one of the big cities. And in their transformation, how with increasing population they need land distribution, how they should be given some land, especially those without soil, without land, landless, to landless families. And then he also advocates introducing tractors into the village. Okay, 50s, the tractors started entering into coastal villages and they're just closer to the cities. Now, Cahit Tanyol is saying that to these villages also it should be introduced. And then he advocates village cooperatives, which will contribute to their production and levels of consumption and welfare, of course, their welfare. Comparing actually villages and in terms of three villages, three monographies, he's comparing them and also advocating some reform. And then he has another study. This time, this is published in 1959. The 50 villages where tractor already is a means of production, and how that introduced new population movements, and how there are social changes as a result of these changes in the patterns and organization of production with this new technology in the family structure, in the other parts. As I said, the village studies for Cahit Tanyol is left in 1950s. His work in 60s, 70s, 90s to the present is, as I said, about the state. Now, he's a statist, really, as a sociologist. In this article, he's talking about development of sociology in Turkey. Development of sociology in Turkey. Actually, this is a speech given in other, let me see, Sparta. Sparta University Sociology Department. He is invited there, and he delivered this speech, and then it is being deciphered by students there and published in Türk Sosyoloji Cemiyeti'nin dergisi Sosyoloji Dünyası. It's published there. Okay, now, in this article, he goes into development of sociology. And Niyazi Berkes also did that. Beyce Boran did development of sociology in the world and in America, and she criticized American sociology, and then very little on Turkish sociology. Whereas Niyazi Berkes, starting from Farabi to Katip Çelebi, İbni Haldun, to Ziya Gökalp, even to Hilmi Ziya Ülken and Fındıkoğlu. Remember, now, Cahit Tanyol also talks about this phenomenon, that is the transformation of occupier, monarchical constitutional monarchies in 1976 and 1908, Tanzimat reforms and other reforms. Now, so he talked about Ottoman intellectuals, Ottoman statesmen, and then Young Turks, and how among the Young Turks some emerged. Now, he makes this distinction. He says that those Tanzimat reformers, the reformers in the state, they were mostly imitating Western institutions, the statesmen. And he says somewhere that actually Tanzimat reform articles was dictated by the British ambassador to Ottoman Empire. It is direct. Now, Tanzimat reform is the British English capitalism is expanding to the rest of the world, demanding Ottoman Empire to open itself, to open its markets to capitalist production and export of mass-produced goods and destruction of native industries in textile industries, for example, in Bursa and other places. Whereas he says there are Ottoman intellectuals who are more critical. Okay, they know that they have to understand the West because West is expanding and controlling whatever is happening in the world. So they say they have to understand West. They have to understand Ottoman society, Ottoman language, or eventually they realize that Ottoman language is too foreign to people's spoken language. He talked about that, how the beginnings of language reform, how people's words and Turkish grammar becomes gradually dominant as against the Arabic and Persian grammar of the Ottoman language. And Ottoman language is an hybrid language spoken and written only by the elite of Ottoman Empire, whereas Turkish language is the language spoken by the people in the villages and in the towns. Okay, now how he talked about this, how these intellectuals started developing or learning actually languages of the people and coining new words. For example, Namık Kemal coining the word hürriyet. Okay, that's from Arabic, but the Arabs don't know hürriyet. It is Ottoman, yes, but it is more a Turkified Ottoman or Vatan, for example. So people, Şinasi and Namık Kemal and others, and how that gradually comes to Ziya Gökalp and Prince Bahattin, and how each of them try to understand their societies. Although he adopts Prince Sabahattin's monographical studies, monographical studying one village as a monography, he criticizes him that advocating private enterprise and decentralization is not realistic. And here he says that Ziya Gökalp is more realistic because Turkish state is, he says, is not a state based on class, but he says a cadre state, and a state dominated by the elites in all times, as well as in the early Turkish Republic, but later with multi-party system, it is being now more or less, he says, it is being corrupted. Now there are all these democratizations, but Cahit Tanyol's approach is more elitistic, I will say.